Section 12, Chapter 15 of Elementary Theosophy by L. W. Rogers. This Librivox Recording is in the public domain. Superphysical Evolution. If we accept the idea of evolution at all, we cannot escape the conclusion that there is superphysical evolution. The belief that man is the highest intelligence in the universe, except God himself, would be utterly inconsistent with evolutionary facts and principles. Evolution is a continuous unfolding from within, and it is only the limitation of our senses that leads us to set limitations to it. The one great life of the universe expresses itself in myriad forms and at innumerable levels of development. One of those levels is humanity. But as certainly as our consciousness has evolved to its present stage, it shall go on to higher ones. Orderly gradation is clearly nature's method of expression. A continuous, unbroken line of life reaches downward from man. Its successive stages are seen in the animals, the reptiles, the insects and microbes. Even the great kingdoms into which the biologist divides life fade into each other almost imperceptibly, and it becomes difficult to say where the vegetable kingdom stops and the animal kingdom begins. Just as that continuous chain of life runs downward from man, it must also rise above him until it merges in the Supreme Being. There must necessarily be the higher as well as the lower products of evolution. Man is merely one link in the evolutionary chain. The human level is the point where consciousness has become completely individualized, and is capable of turning back upon itself and studying its own inner processes. The thought of Occidental civilization has been sadly fettered with materialism. It has scarcely dared to think beyond that which could be grasped with the hands. The physical senses were its outposts of investigation. What could not be seen or heard or felt had no existence for it. Modern science explored the material universe and perfected its methods until the vast panorama of worlds could be intimately studied, and its illimitable scope and colossal grandeur be somewhat comprehended. But there was no study of life comparable to the vast stretch of worlds, for material science had made the remarkable blunder of assuming that the last word on the nature of matter had been said. Then came the startling discoveries that revolutionized the accepted views of matter, that proved that the supposedly indivisible atom was a miniature universe, a tiny cosmos of force. The old theories about matter had to be thrown aside. They were as much out of date as the belief that the earth is flat. Stripped of technical terms of expression, the revised view of matter is, substantially, that it is the lowest expression of life. And now modern science is turning tardy attention to a study of the life side of the universe. The moment that is done, the sense of consistency and the law of correspondence compel us to postulate a gradation of intelligence rising above man as man does above insects. The scientific mind instantly grasps the inherent reasonableness of existence of superphysical beings. Writing on the subject of energy, Nikola Tesla says, "We can conceive of organized living beings without nourishment and deriving all energy they need for the performance of their life functions from the ambient medium. There may be individualized material systems of beings, perhaps of gaseous constitution, or composed of substance still more tenuous. In view of this possibility, nay, probability, we cannot apodictically deny the existence of organized beings on a planet merely because the conditions on the same are unsuitable for the existence of life as we conceive it. We cannot even, with positive assurance, assert that some of them might not be present here in this our world, in the very midst of us. For their constitution and life manifestation may be such that we are unable to perceive them." Footnote: The Conservation of Energy. Nikola Tesla, Century Magazine, June 1900. End footnote. Alfred Russel Wallace, who was called the great old man of science, wrote in one of his latest books, "I think we have got to recognize that between man and the ultimate God there is an almost infinite multitude of beings working in the universe at large, at tasks as definite and important as any we have to perform on earth. I imagine that the universe is peopled with spirits, that is, with intelligent beings, with powers and duties akin to our own, but vaster. I think there is a gradual ascent from man upward and onward. While the scientist, still lacking the absolutely conclusive evidence, goes only to the point of asserting that it is reasonable and probable that supermen exist, the occultist asserts it as a fact within his personal knowledge. Footnote: An outline of Theosophy, C. W. Leadbeater, pages 6 through 12. End footnote. So we have the direct testimony of the occultists, the endorsement of the scientists as to its probability, and perhaps the most important of all, the inherent reasonableness of the idea. The relationship of the supermen, or great spiritual hierarchy, to the human race is that of teachers, guardians, and directors. They superintend human evolution, but this does not mean in the very least the relationship that is expressed in the term spirit guides so frequently used by the spiritualist. That is a totally different thing. They seem to imply that the spirit guide gives direct instructions or orders to the person known as a medium. If we were all thus controlled and directed, what would become of free will? Evolution can proceed only if we use our initiative in the affairs of life. If we were to be directed by the wisdom and will of others, we would not evolve at all. We would be merely automata, directed by others, and no matter how great they were, we could never thus develop our judgment and self-reliance. It is not thus that the great spiritual hierarchy directs human evolution. It is in part by working with mankind in mass and bringing mental and moral forces to play upon them, thus stimulating latent spiritual forces from within. It is also by directly or indirectly placing ideals instead of commands before the race. In another direction it is actual superintendence or administration or teaching, in a way that does not interfere with one's initiative or will. If the soul is to evolve, it must have liberty, even the freedom to make mistakes. It is sometimes asked why, if the supermen exist, those who are in incarnation do not come out into the world and give us ocular evidence of the fact. It is pointed out that they could speedily convince the world by a display of superphysical force, but they are probably not in the least interested in convincing anybody of their existence. They are interested in raising the general level of morality, of course. But such an exhibition would not make people morally better. The work of the supermen can best be done from higher planes than the physical. As for the very small number of the supermen who take physical bodies to better do their special work, they can best accomplish it from secluded places, and if they sometimes have reason to come out into the seething vibrations of our modern civilization, it is easy to understand that they would not be conspicuously different from other men, to the ordinary observer. It is from the spiritual hierarchy that come all the religions of the world. There the question may arise, then why do they differ so greatly? Because the peoples to whom they are given differ greatly. The difference of temperament and viewpoint between the Orient and Occident is enormous. We are evolving along the outer, the objective, and our civilization represents the material conquest of nature. They are evolving the inner, the subjective. In the Orient, the common trend of conversation is philosophical, just as in the Occident it is commercial. Such different types of mind require somewhat different statements of ethics, but the fundamental principles of all religions are identical. When a new era in human evolution begins, a world teacher comes into voluntary incarnation and founds a religion that is suited to the requirements of the new era. Humanity is never left to grope along alone. All that it can comprehend and utilize is taught in the various religions. World teachers, the Christs and Saviors of the race, have been appearing at propitious times since humanity began existence. Most readers will probably agree that a world teacher known as the Christ did come and found a religion nearly 2,000 years ago. Why do they think so? They reply that God so loved the world that he sent his Son, the Christ, to bring light and life. If that is true, how can we avoid the conclusion that he, or his predecessors, must have come many a time before? The belief that he came but once is consistent only with the erroneous notion that Genesis is history instead of allegory, and that the earth is about 6,000 years old. Science has not determined its age, but we know that it is very old indeed. Many eminent scientists have made rough estimates, taking into consideration all that we have learned from astronomy, geology, and archaeology. Phillips, the geologist, basing his calculations upon the time required for the depositions of stratified rocks, put the minimum age at 38 million years and the maximum age at 96 million years. Sir George Darwin, basing his calculation wholly upon astronomical data, puts the Earth's age at a minimum of 56 million years. Joly arrived at his estimate by calculation of the time required to produce the sodium content of the ocean, and concluded that the age of the Earth is between 80 million and 100 million years. Sollas is said to have made careful study of the matter, and he finds the minimum to be 80 million, and the maximum age to be 150 million years. But perhaps the most exhaustive study of the matter, and that made by the use of the later scientific knowledge, was by Bosler, of the French scientists. He bases his calculations upon the radioactivity of rocks, and arrives at a minimum Earth age of 710 million years. Thus it will be observed that as our knowledge grows, the estimated age of the Earth increases. In the face of such facts, what becomes of the assertion that God so loved the world that he sent his Son to help ignorant humanity about 2,000 years ago, but never before? What about the hundreds of millions of human beings who lived and died before that time? Did he care nothing for them? Did he give his attention to humanity for a period of only 2,000 years and neglect it for millions of years? 2,000 years, compared to the age of the earth, is less than an hour in the ordinary life of a man. Does anybody believe that God, in his great compassion, sent just one world teacher for that brief period? What would we say of a father who gave 1 hour of his whole life to his child and neglected him absolutely before and after that? Countless millions of the people who lived and died prior to the coming of the Christ were very much like ourselves. They belonged to ancient civilizations that often surpassed our own in many desirable characteristics. They were educated and cultured in their time and fashion. They were fathers and sons and mothers and daughters and husbands and wives, with the same kind of heart ties that we have. What of them? Were they permitted to grope in the moral wilderness without a teacher or a ray of light? Of course, this idea is preposterous. If God so loved the world that he sent his Son 2,000 years ago, he sent him, or some predecessor, very many times before. By the same token, he will come again. The only logical escape from such a conclusion is in the materialist's belief that he never came at all. All religions crystallize, become materialized, and lose their spiritual significance. That is precisely what has happened to the various great religions of the modern world, including Christianity. It is no longer the dynamic thing in the lives of the people it once was. That's why a world war was possible. The fault is not with the teachings of the Christ. The trouble is that the world has not lived by them. We need a restatement of the old teachings in the terms of modern life that shall again make it a living force in the lives of men. It is when the world teacher is most needed that he comes, and when has the need been greater than now? The world war has demonstrated the failure of so-called Christian civilization. We have seen the highest type of that civilization revert to the law of the jungle, deliberately disregard the usages of civilized warfare, and commit atrocities that would shame barbarians. We surely need no further proof that the Christian religion has not accomplished all that the spiritual hierarchy had a right to hope for, and that the coming of the Christ again is a necessity. But the spiritual hierarchy sends its great ambassadors only when the time is propitious, only when the world is ready to listen. Perhaps such an event can never be predicted in terms of time, but only in those of conditions. When the strength of the nations is spent, when the slain totals appalling numbers, when few homes of high or low degree are without their terrible sacrifice, when the heart of the race is filled with anguish, when famine and disease have done their awful work, and humanity fully realizes that the reaction from greed, lust, cruelty, and revenge actually means, the world will be ready to listen as it never listened before, and after that we may reasonably expect the Christ to again appear to reproclaim the ancient truth in terms of modern life. Supermen are not myths nor figments of imagination. They are as natural and comprehensive as human beings. In the regular order of evolution we shall reach their level and join their ranks while younger humanities shall attain our present estate. As the supermen rose, we too shall rise. Our past has been evolution's night. Our present is its dawn. Our future shall be its perfect day. Think of that night from which we have emerged, a chaos of contending forces, a world in which might was the measure of right, a civilization of scepter and sword, of baron and serf, of master and slave, that we have left behind us. Think of the gray dawn that our civilization has reached, the dawn of a public conscience, of individual liberty, of collective welfare, of the sacredness of life, but with armed force still dominant, with war the arbiter of national destiny, with industrial slavery still lingering, with conflict between the higher aspirations and the lower desires still raging, a world of selfishness masked by civilized usage, a world of veneered cruelty and refined brutality, in all that we now live. But think of the coming results of evolution, an era in which love shall replace force, when saber and cannon shall be unknown, when selfish desire shall be transmuted into noble service, when finally we shall finish the painful period of human evolution and join the spiritual hierarchy to direct the faltering steps of a younger race. End of section 12, chapter 15. Recording by Kirk Ziegler, Ogden, Utah. Voiceovers by Kirk.com. End of Elementary Theosophy by L. W. Rogers.